Shri svādhiṣṭhāna Shakti brahma-cāriņai namaha. Shri svādhiṣṭhāna Shakti Shri brahma-cāriņai namaha. Shri svādhiṣṭhāna Shakti Shri brahma-cāriņai namaha. Jai Hind, folks. Welcome to the second night celebration of the Nava-rātri in 2021. We are focusing on our svādhiṣṭhāna chakra today, the second of the major chakras. Yesterday we went to look at the very first, namely the Mūladhara chakra, and there we met Shailaputri, right? Now, before people jump to conclusions and start praying to these so-called goddesses, it's important for me to clarify right away. Probably need to do it for every one of these sessions, that the calendar artists and even the sculptors for that matter, great artists that they were, unknowingly, unintentionally have done great injustice to these wonderful concepts of scriptural wisdom through the Vedas, because none of these are actual physical entities outside of us to be bowed down to and prayed. But nonetheless, the Anjali Mudra that is being done is by the body, mind and intellect to our real nature, that of the Atma and Prana, life. So it is that aspect of us which dominates on a particular celebratory day that these artists have given a form to, based on these scriptural descriptions. But recognize that it is actually us. Yesterday, we were operating from the Mūladhara chakra and we were...
I'm not sure I understand.
Shailaputri. Today, we are operating from the svādhiṣṭhāna chakra and we are brahma-cāriNi ourselves. And so on, it will go. I do not want to reveal the suspense, though some of you might know these names. But we are going beyond the names and forms, becoming that ourselves. So for example, yesterday, we were born out of the mountains and operating from the Mūladhara chakra, which is the field of the earth, which is also the zodiacal signs of Capricorn and Aquarius, Makara and Kumbha, belonging to Saturn or Shanaishchara, the slowest moving of all the grahas which directly affect us, living around Neptune, Uranus, etc. So the slowest is almost akin to, in an asymptotic sense, stillness, which is samadhi. And from that stage of inertness, because everything below that were the lower evolutionary forms that we have evolved from, the single-celled amoeba to bacteria, virus, the various insects, worms, the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, the birds, and eventually the human form that we have taken. And the further evolution begins by becoming ourselves Shailaputri, irrespective of our gender. Physically, our physical body might be that of a man or a woman, doesn't matter. But our energy is called Shailaputri, is born out of the mountains. Because the mountains are an expression of exuberance or joy of the earth, the coming out. In fact, we say every day in the morning when we wake up, Samudravasane Devi Parvatasthana Vishnupatnyai Namastubhyam Padasparsham Kshamaswame Bhumitaye Manichidma. Referring to the Mother Earth and saying that the oceans, which are significant for today's topic of brahma-cāriNi, those oceans are the clothes of Mother Earth. And so we have moved from Mother Earth yesterday to her clothing today, the Samudra. And there we also met Parvatasthana. The breasts of Mother Earth are those mountains. And what is born out of those mountains is Shailaputri. So in other words, the breast milk, nourishing, nutritious of Mother Earth, which has made us from, let's say, a 3 kilogram infant to what we are today, 60, 70 kilograms. All of this has happened because of that nutrition that the Mother Earth has provided to us through her exuberance in the form of mountains. Another thing that we can think of as Shailaputri, that born out of the mountains and flowing down, is the river. Because most rivers originate on top of hilly, mountainous terrain and then flow down. And that flowing down is what, in the reverse order, becomes flowing up of the kundalini Shakti, our true nature, to meet our next milestone as brahma-cāriNi. You see me wearing white today, the dress typically worn of brahmacharis and brahma-cārinis who have given up the worldly way of usual life to attain something which is primordial, which is far more substantial. In other words, they have denied themselves the little tiny pleasures that most of us are running after to seek the infinite pleasure called bliss and ecstasy. They have given up the small, tiny social circles that we call families, colleagues, relatives, friends, etc., to make the whole world their family. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. That is what brahmachari or brahma-cāriNi truly means. And that's what we potentially are today. Most people mistake it as celibacy. Well, celibacy is one form of expression of a brahmachari or a brahma-cāriNi that is observed by people, and therefore they think of it as a synonym. No, it's far, far more than what celibacy is. Yes, monkhood, nunneries, etc., the monasteries, they might have that kind of a restriction of celibacy. But what we are talking about as brahmachari is etymologically brahmachara. Iti brahmachari or brahmacāriNi. Chara means to walk, to move. And Brahma is referring to Brahman, our true nature. So in this whole journey of the Kundalini from the Mooladhara to the Guru Gayatri Chakra, the 7 stops in between, if you include the source of Mooladhara and the destination of Guru Gayatri, 7 plus 2, it becomes 9, for which we celebrate our energies while we are operating from each of these in our journey of sadhana towards becoming a seer from what we are today, a seeker. So from a sadhak, we want to become a rishi, one who perceives reality as it is. And that is essentially what we are trying to accomplish in this journey. And the very first step, after we have started moving from being Shanaishchara or almost till a 30-year cycle to now a little faster 12-year cycle of Jupiter, namely the Dhanur and Meena Rashis, which is Sagittarius and Pisces in the Western zodiac terminology. And that belongs to Jupiter, the Guru. And who gets exalted over here? Shukra or Venus. And therefore, this is essentially the place of our reproduction in a worldly sense, but production in a more creative sense of our ability to create the entire universe every moment and recreate it every other moment as its own mother. And that's what we are doing when we are brahma-cāriNi at the svādhiṣṭhāna chakra. So a brahma-cāriNi may not be married, may be a virgin, but through her subtle nature has accepted the entire universe as her child. And that's the concept of a virgin mother, be it Mary or Kunti for Karna, etc. Now, we have to go beyond these stories and names and forms, as I already mentioned. And that's where we come across the fact that from Shailaputri of the earth, the mountain, we are now water. And this is the symbolism that is described in our scriptures, which you also see in the picturization of the calendar artists and the sculptors, of brahma-cāriNi holding Rudraksha beads and a water pot, kamandala as it is called. Now this word ka is very important here as a root word for happiness. So it is ka mandala. It is the mandala or a sacred geometry of happiness. And that's what is holding the water here. Therefore, the water takes the shape of that. Unlike the earth, which was a solid, which we were yesterday, rigid, not so flexible, very stiff, and therefore stressful, we have now come to a state of brahma-cāriNi instead of Shailaputri. And now we are flexible like water. We are flowing like water. From the mountain it has originated. But unlike rivers which flow from the top to the bottom, this kundalini Shakti is flowing from the bottom to the top through an inhalation where we are energizing. But the same thing when we exhale will come down as well. And this goes on in cycles, with every inhalation being our new birth and every exhalation being our death. And therefore, they have to go hand in hand. And what does this Ka Mandala I already mentioned? The same way, a couple of other Kas, or happinesses, are also symbolic of the svādhiṣṭhāna chakra. When we are operating from it, we are brahma-cāriNi. And there are two things that we conquer, or you could say amplify rather than conquer, because it is kama and krodha. Many people understand kama as just lust and krodha as just anger, short temper. Now again, just like we broke up kamandala as ka and mandala, we can break up kama as ka and ama. And ama means raw, that which is not yet ripened, which is temporary. And therefore, ka being happiness and ama being temporary, this kama refers to temporary happiness, or what we call as pleasures of the body, of the world, of the materialistic nature. And when a kama is not satisfied, what results out of it? Krodha, which is again ka plus rodha. Rodha means an obstruction. Many of the older generation people will remember the first condom probably introduced in India by the government called Nirodh. So there also there is Rodh, which is obstruction, an obstruction of the flow of semen for birth control. Similarly here, ka and rodha is krodha. It is obstruction of happiness. So you see, kama, krodha go hand in hand. You're chasing after something. When you get it, it's a temporary pleasure, but gives accompanying unpleasantness or sadness as well. It's almost like a very small fraction of happiness packaged with a lot of unhappiness. And when the kama is obstructed or the object of that pleasure or happiness is removed from us, even for a short while temporarily, we feel krodha, ka, rodha, happiness obstructed. So you see, this is essentially what we want to transform into kama, not for just thing or that thing, but for everything or nothing, which is Vishnu or Shiva. Again, don't go to the calendar art or what you see in a temple, because those are just like images. Those images have become more important for us than the truth, which is right here. That is you, I, and everybody else. That is the real Shiva, that is the real Vishnu. Instead, we are looking at the mirror and making the image that is appearing in the mirror far more important. Or more importantly, in these days, we can think of it as a selfie, the selfie becoming more important than the self. Selfie becoming more important than the self. A photo or a video becoming more important than who is being imaged in that photo or video. And we have to move back from that. Once we move back, there is no concept of prayer, because prayer is when I have made a symbol out of myself and I'm praying to it. Like I love my video so much that I start praising it more than me. Think of it as more worthy than me. Similarly, a selfie. Similarly, a mirror image. Same thing is happening with these gods and goddesses. They are just mirror images of who we are when we are operating from the various chakras. And we give them so much importance that we start praying to them. So remember that it's not you and I who are praying to them, but it is our body, mind, and intellect which are praying to them, but not them in reality, but to us, to ourself in reality, this time today operating from the svādhiṣṭhāna chakra, which is the chakra of brahma-cāriNi. Om Shri Brahma-cāriņyai Namaha. Om Shri svādhiṣṭhāna Shaktiyai Namo Namaha. And this is the reason why the story of Manmatha, or Man is mind, and Matha or Manthan is basically the churning of the mind through lots of a series and chains of thoughts and emotions, which is what the subtle body is essentially made out of. And Rati is essentially the little desires that we are running after. And therefore, we are giving up what we truly are capable of, the infinite or zero, which are just again reciprocals of each other. So we were Shailaputri yesterday, we are Brahma-cāriNi today. Please don't pray to Shailaputri, don't pray to Brahma-cāriNi, and convert the wonderful concepts of Sanatana Dharma to be packaged in Western religious terminologies of God, prayer, etc. No, it's far beyond that. It's a recognition of Aham Brahmasmi that we started off yesterday with Prajnanam Brahma, and we move slowly Vaya Tattvamasi, I am Atma Brahma, to Aham Brahmasmi. In that path, today we are brahma-cārinis, that is essentially those who are traveling the path of Brahman, the ultimate truth, the fact that everything is omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient, eternal, and that we are. And to recognize that we have taken the first baby step from the Mooladhara to the svādhiṣṭhāna, still with a Rajasic guna, where Kama, Krodha play a role, but can be transformed into Kama for everything, and Krodha without a reason. When anger is about a particular situation, then it is a limiting factor. When we are just angry out of the blue, for no reason at all, totally involved in our anger, that is also a sadhana. Similarly, a desire not for this thing or that thing, but for everything or for nothing, and then it becomes a sadhana. It can take us from the limited physical entity that we are to the unlimited, subtle and causal entity that we eventually are. Aum Shri Brahma-cāriNi Namo Namaha. And Rudraksha and lotus are two other things that she carries apart from the water, which takes the shape of whatever it flows into, unlike the solidified earth. So it's much more flexible compared to the Shailaputri that we wore yesterday. Today we are far more flexible. And this Rudraksha is Rudra's Aksha, the tears of ecstasy. Again, don't put it on one particular person many thousands of years ago who was on the Kailash mountain, who was shedding tears of ecstasy in his stillness, in his bliss of the inner realization of who he and all of us are in all inclusivity. No, this is essentially what happens when we start doing everything consciously. We seem to do things out of a habitual pattern, unconsciously, without awareness. But once we bring in full consciousness into whatever we do, that is essentially Rudraksha. So when a brahmachari or a brahma-cāriNi wears a Rudraksha, it's a constant reminder for them that we have to do whatever we do consciously. We have to speak whatever we speak consciously. We have to think whatever we think consciously. And when thought, words, and action are not required, we will be in utter stillness and silence. And that's a true brahmacāriNi that we are today, irrespective of whether we are male or female. And that Rudraksha then takes on our power to protect us with an aura, with a cocoon around us, so that no external disturbances can affect our internal state of bliss and ecstasy on this path that we are traveling upwards through an energizing inhalation, already one step taken from the Mooladhara to the svādhiṣṭhāna, from being Shailaputri to being brahmacāriNi, and we'll see what we will become tomorrow. Namaskaram.